He looked me straight in the eyes and said, "You people always have a story." Her voice didn't crack. Not then. Not when the cuffs clicked shut. Not when they laughed at her ID. But the disbelief, that stayed. I kept thinking, if I explain calmly, if I show them my credentials, they'll understand. They'll let me go. She was wrong. It's a bright afternoon in downtown St. Louis. A keynote speech, standing ovation, name tags that say, Dr. Marla Davis, Federal Intelligence Council. She walks out the hotel lobby, phone to her ear, discussing encryption models and national briefings. 2 blocks away, a police cruiser cruises by. A vague dispatch, a description that could be anyone or no one. But they see her. I'm a national advisor. I'm supposed to be in D.C. tomorrow morning. I thought if I just stayed calm, none of this would escalate. But it did. Because when you're black and brilliant, calm is seen as arrogance. Success is seen as threat. And authority? Authority doesn't protect you, unless you're the one holding it. This is not a story about misunderstanding. It's about erasure, and what happens when the system forgets who you are until someone more powerful reminds them. And I swear, when that call came in, the whole precinct stopped breathing. If stories like this hit you, if they make you think, feel, and question, then this is the space for you. Subscribe now. There's more beneath the surface, and we're just getting started. It started like so many tragedies do, with an assumption. Marla Davis had just stepped out of the Renaissance Grand, the afternoon sun brushing her face as she blinked against the brightness. She was tired, mentally drained after 3 back-to-back panels. She was hungry. Her lunch had been a cold muffin backstage. But inside, she carried the quiet pride of having just delivered a keynote that would be quoted in industry journals for months. Her lanyard still hung around her neck. Dr. Marla Davis, Federal Intelligence Council. But none of that mattered. Not to them. As she walked toward the parking garage scrolling through emails, a call came in from her assistant, reminding her of tomorrow's briefing. She nodded absently, replying, "Yeah, tell the chief tech officer I'll have the encryption model finalized by tonight." Her voice was calm, focused, unaware of what was coming. At the same time, 2 officers sat in their cruiser, responding to a report from a nearby boutique. Suspect, black woman, mid-30s, dark hair, walks like she owns the place. That last part wasn't even in the official dispatch, but it stuck in their minds, because to them, confidence was a red flag. When they spotted her, walking alone, dressed in a sharp blazer, looking straight ahead with purpose, they didn't see a professional. They didn't see a national advisor. They didn't see a human being. They saw a suspect. And in that instant, everything changed. "Hey, stop right there!" She turned confused, her eyebrows furrowing. "Is something wrong, officers?" They didn't answer. They didn't need to. One grabbed her arm while the other reached for cuffs. "I think there's been a mistake. I just left a conference. Look, my ID is right here." "Ma'am, don't make this harder than it has to be." "Harder than what? I haven't done anything." But logic meant nothing. Her credentials were ignored. Her calm tone dismissed. Her dignity stripped, inch by inch, as passers-by began to slow down and watch. Some pulled out phones, most looked away. Because that's what people do when they don't want to get involved. And in the middle of it all, Marla stood frozen. Not with fear, but with disbelief. This wasn't happening. Not here. Not to her. But the cold metal against her wrists said otherwise. She was brilliant, respected, scheduled to advise the White House in less than 24 hours. But to them, she was just a description, just a profile, just a problem to remove from the street. And no one stopped to ask, what if they were wrong? If you've made it this far, it means you see what others choose to ignore. Subscribe now, because stories like Marla's deserve to be told and heard all the way to the end. They led her into a gray, windowless room, the kind designed to make you forget what time it is. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, harsh, clinical, unrelenting. A camera blinked red in the corner like a mechanical eye that watched without conscience. And across the metal table, Two men sat, not investigating, not even observing, just waiting. Not for answers, but for a moment. A crack, a misstep, something they could use. They didn't see Dr. Marla Davis, cybersecurity expert, federal advisor, keynote speaker. They saw a silhouette, a profile that matched a description, a name that didn't fit the face they expected. And that was enough. "Where were you coming from?" Brent asked casually, as if this were all routine, as if this room wasn't humming with tension. She answered without hesitation. "The National Cybersecurity Summit. I was a keynote speaker." They exchanged a glance, a smirk. "Oh, really? So now you're what? Some kind of expert?" "I am," she said, still composed. "I'm Dr. Marla Davis. I work with the Federal Intelligence Council. You can call Director Shaw. He—" But Brent cut her off with a lazy raise of his hand. "Let me stop you right there." He leaned forward, arms on the table, voice low and soaked in condescension. "We get it. You people always got a story." "You people?" she echoed, her voice calm but sharp, slicing through the air. He didn't blink, didn't correct himself, because he didn't have to. Then Keller, still standing, slid a printout across the table. A grainy surveillance still. Blurry. Diamond soins. The woman in the image wore a hoodie, had braids, was moving fast. Nothing matched. Not the clothes, not the hair, not the posture. But that didn't matter. All they needed was close enough. "This look like you?" Marla looked at the photo, then at them. "Number, that woman has braids. I don't." They rolled their eyes as if she was the one being ridiculous. She opened her phone, still unlocked from earlier. She pulled up her calendar, keynote, 2 p.m., her slides, her photo on stage. She gave them names, emails, a federal clearance number, her supervisor's contact. Her credentials weren't just solid, they were airtight. She even offered her fingerprints. But none of it mattered, because they weren't checking facts. They were feeding assumptions. They weren't trying to uncover the truth. They were trying to bend her until she broke. "Why are you resisting?" "I'm not." "Why are you lying?" "I'm not." "Who do you think you are?" She paused. Not out of fear, but calculation. She looked Brent dead in the eye. "I'm Dr. Marla Davis. I advise federal intelligence agencies on cybersecurity infrastructure. I'm due in Washington by morning." But her voice, measured, factual, authoritative, was met with silence. No nods, no glances, no scribbled notes. It floated in the air and fell like a stone. Because it wasn't about what she said, it was about who she was. And in that room, truth wasn't measured by evidence. It was measured by power. And their power told them they didn't have to listen. Not to her. Not to someone with her voice, her poise, her skin. Because the badge on their chest whispered in their ear, "You decide who matters." And in that moment, they had decided, long before the questions even started. The phone rang like a gunshot in the silence, a single shrill vibration that cut through the stale air of the precinct, sharp, sudden, and completely out of place. Officer Brent didn't even flinch. He sighed, annoyed, like someone being interrupted mid-power trip. With one hand, he reached for the receiver. With the other, he kept his glare locked on Marla, still sitting alone behind the one-way glass, still cuffed, still calm. Downtown precinct, Officer Brent speaking. Then, a pause. A strange one. A pause that stretched just a few seconds too long. And something shifted. His brow furrowed, almost involuntarily. His jaw tensed. His spine straightened ever so slightly, as if the voice on the other end had physically reached through the line and grabbed him by the collar. Yes, ma'am. He blinked, then stopped mid-sentence. His face went pale. Because the voice on the other end wasn't asking for Officer Brent. She already knew who he was, and more importantly, she knew what he'd done. It wasn't a local lawyer, not a journalist, not even a mayor. It was a senior advisor to the President of the United States, calling, directly, No secretary, no middleman, no filter, a secured White House line, unmistakable and untraceable, reserved for emergencies, for classified intel, for moments when the weight of the federal government needs to make itself felt. And she wasn't here to negotiate, she was here to command. "You are currently detaining Dr. Marla Davis," the voice said. Calm, even, controlled, but with the kind of authority that makes grown men forget how to breathe. National-level cybersecurity advisor, federal clearance level 5. She is scheduled to brief the president tomorrow at 0900 hours. She paused. Brent didn't. He couldn't move, couldn't blink, could barely breathe. "You have 60 seconds to release her," the voice continued. "No paperwork, no delay, no excuses. Just do it. And while you're at it, start looking for a lawyer. You're going to need one." Then, click. Silence. But not just from Brent, from the entire room. The officers near the door froze. Keller, standing in the hallway, looked like someone had knocked the air out of his chest. His hands hovered over his belt. He wasn't reaching for anything anymore. No one moved. It was like the entire building had stopped breathing. The atmosphere shifted, subtly at first, like a change in barometric pressure. Then all at once, like a storm had broken through the walls. The kind of shift you feel in your bones before you even understand why. Because suddenly, it didn't matter what uniform they wore, what report they thought they were writing, or what assumptions they had made. They weren't in charge anymore. Brent stared at the receiver in his hand like it was a loaded weapon. He muttered something, unintelligible, maybe a curse, maybe a prayer, then hung up. And when he finally turned back to Marla, the glare was gone, replaced by something else. Not respect, not remorse. Fear. For the first time since they put their hands on her, they saw her not as a threat, but as someone they should never have touched. And Marla? She hadn't said a word. She didn't have to, because power had just spoken. And this time, it wasn't wearing a badge, it was wearing a suit. And it had a direct line to the most powerful office in the world. It all unraveled faster than they could scramble to cover it up. The moment that call ended, the precinct didn't feel like a station anymore. It felt like a crime scene. Phones rang without being answered. Officers exchanged glances. The air was thick with a panic no one dared name. Because in law enforcement, there's one word that changes everything. Washington. Within the hour, the precinct captain stormed in, his steps sharp, his jaw clenched, his voice low and controlled, but shaking underneath. He didn't ask what happened. He already knew. His eyes scanned the holding cell like it was radioactive. And it was, because the woman they had just tried to bury was bigger than all of them. By morning, Brent and Keller were off duty, not reassigned, not quietly transferred, suspended, publicly, with names in headlines and faces on national news. But it didn't stop there. Because mistakes like this don't get swept under rugs. They tear the floor out from under the whole building. By the end of the week, the department was under full federal review. Investigators arrived in unmarked suits. The media set up camp outside. The precinct walls, once so used to silence, now echoed with whispers and fear. Internal Affairs opened every drawer, scrutinized every body cam, reviewed every arrest report that had ever felt too convenient. And Marla? She wasn't in a cell anymore. She was back in Washington. But this time, not behind the scenes. Not behind her usual desk in cybersecurity strategy. She was in front of a congressional panel, under the brightest lights in the country. Microphones live, cameras rolling, every senator leaning in. Not because they were curious, but because they were afraid. Afraid of what she was about to reveal, and how many others like her had been ignored. But this time, she didn't speak about firewalls or digital breaches. She spoke about the oldest virus in the system: racial bias, systemic neglect, the cost of being unseen until you're targeted. She told them about the cuffs, the tone of their voices, the way her degrees, her ID, her name meant nothing, the way her blackness had overruled her clearance. Her voice didn't tremble. It didn't need to. Truth like that doesn't whisper. It roars. And she didn't testify as a victim. She testified as a survivor of something far more insidious than a false arrest, a survivor of a system designed to doubt her until someone more powerful told it not to. She reminded them that intelligence doesn't shield you, titles don't save you. Even proximity to the White House isn't enough when they've already decided who you are. She had been ignored, laughed at, silenced. But now the nation was listening, and no one could look away. This story could have ended in that cold, windowless room, with apologies, with a rushed release, with a quietly deleted report. That's how it usually ends, if it ends at all. A bruise fades, a name gets cleared, a headline disappears by morning. But Marla Davis didn't vanish. She refused to. Because what they underestimated wasn't just her clearance level or the weight of her title, it was her resolve. They thought they could write her off. Another misidentification. Another oops in a broken system. But Marla knew something they didn't. She wasn't alone. Behind her stood a legacy of voices that had been silenced, overlooked, erased. Names we chant, names we mourn, names that echo in every courtroom where the verdict comes too late. But she carried them forward, not as ghosts, but as fuel. And now something had shifted. Across the country, police departments reviewed their protocols, not because they wanted to, but because they had to. Universities held forums. Tech agencies re-examined security partnerships. Even morning shows that usually stuck to fluff segments began asking hard questions, because the public saw something they weren't supposed to see. A woman who did everything right and still ended up in cuffs. A doctor, an expert, a patriot, treated like a threat because she dared to exist while black and brilliant. And as for those who questioned her, who dismissed her degrees, her voice, her name, they're no longer the ones writing the narrative. Now we are. Because Marla's story didn't just expose a moment, it exposed a mirror. One that forces us to ask, how many more have we missed? How many more have we failed? And what happens when the ones you silence learn how to speak through megaphones? So the next time someone says, that's not how the system works, you look them in the eye and say, it is. And that's the problem. Because truth doesn't whisper anymore. It walks into Congress, stares into the camera, and dares the whole nation to look away. If you believe stories like Marla's need to echo louder, hit subscribe. Because silence protects no one. But truth changes everything.